Welcome to the Center for Railroad Photography and Arts online program for November 2025. Thank you for joining us tonight. As a reminder, we utilize Zoom webinar for our online presentations. Using the chat function, tell us where you're joining us from. My name is Lisa Hardy, and tonight I'm joining from Janesville, Wisconsin. It has been a cold, wet, and dreary day here. Hopefully the weather's been better by you. During the presentation, we encourage you to continue to use the chat to share your thoughts and comments. But remember to use the Q&A icon to submit any questions following the presentation to ensure that we see them. Tonight, we have a number of new audience members, so I thought it would be a good opportunity to quickly introduce the center. The Center for Railroad Photography and Art is a membership-supported organization with a mission to preserve and present significant images of railroading. We accomplish our mission through several core programs, including monthly online programming, conferences, traveling exhibitions, the John E. Gruber Creative Photography Awards program, publications, and our Railroad Heritage Visual Archive. None of these programs would be possible without the support of our members. To our current members, we thank you. Don't forget to renew your membership for 2026. If you are joining us for the first time tonight, we encourage you to become a member. Annual membership is only $50 and includes a variety of benefits that include 4 issues of our magazine, Railroad Heritage. The first issue of 2026 is currently at the printer and should be hitting mailboxes in December. I must mention that Orrin Hellbach wrote a beautiful article called Rail Fans and Everyone Else, Learning New Ways to See Railroads and the People Along Them. Orrin's words and photography beautifully describe the unifying power of railroad photography and the stories of people both in front of and behind the lens. There is so much more to find in this issue. Become a member today by visiting our website at railphoto-art.org/support to ensure you get your copy of Railroad Heritage. You can also follow us on social media at RailPhotoArt. L. Ron Lawrence does a fantastic job on our social media channels. We would love to include you in our remarkable online community. We're currently a little over halfway through our fall book sale. 6 of our books are on sale at 40% off. These make fantastic holiday gifts. You can visit our website to purchase these remarkable books today. Remember that this sale ends on December 1st. In September, we announced the theme for our 2026 John E. Gruber Creative Photography Awards program, Water. In this photograph by Carl Zimmerman, trains from the Canadian National Railway and Maine Central Railroad fill the tracks at Maine Central in Portland, Maine on July 7, 1974. As workers walk between trains, their reflections are mirrored in puddles left by a recent rainstorm. Photographers are encouraged to interpret this theme of water across the operation of railroads with as much latitude as desired. Submission information can be found on our website at www.railphoto-art.org/awards/water. Entries are due by May 18th, 2026. We will be holding our annual conference in Indianapolis, Indiana on April 24th through the 26th, 2026 at the incredible Indiana History Center. I've said it before and I'll probably say it many more times. There's something really special about our annual conference. I wish I could pinpoint exactly what makes it so special. However, I've decided it's not just one thing. It's the community of incredibly kind, generous, and thoughtful people who love train photography and art. It's the friendships that have been created and endured. It's the laughter, gasps of awe, and the excitement to see what will happen in the next presentation. In 2025, one of the attendees from Ohio remembered that he and I had discussed Skyline chili at the 2024 conference and that I had never tried it. He brought me 2 cans of Skyline chili so that I could try it for myself. I'd officially like to report it was delicious. If you're interested in being inspired by presenters who exemplify railroad photography and art and meet some of the best people on earth, I encourage you to make plans to join us. Who knows? You might come away from the 2026 conference with your own can of Skyline chili. Tickets will go on sale in early January 2026. All right, let's get to the main event. Tonight, we are exceptionally lucky to be hearing from Julie Novarese Pierotti. In 2024, the third issue of Railroad Heritage included a new exhibition catalog review by Scott Lodes. This catalog was for an art exhibition with the same name, which opened at the Shelburne Museum in Vermont, traveled to the Dixon Gallery Gardens in Memphis, Tennessee, and then on to the Joslyn Art Museum in Omaha, Nebraska. In his review of the catalog, Scott stated, "Beautifully designed and produced, All Aboard is essential for anyone interested in artist depictions of American railroads." This review was the first time I had heard of this exciting exhibition, and an idea quickly was born after Scott's positive review. Could we possibly get one of the curators to present for us? In February 2025, I reached out to Julie and was thrilled when she accepted the invitation to present tonight. Over the past several months, I have found Julie to be a class act in every way. It is my honor to introduce her to you this evening. Julie Novarese Pierotti is the Martha R. Robinson Curator at the Dixon Gallery Gardens in Memphis, Tennessee. A native of Memphis, she graduated from the University of Mississippi with a bachelor's degree in art history and went on to receive an MA in the history of art from Vanderbilt University. Since joining the staff of the Dixon in 2007, she has helped organize a number of exhibitions for the museum, including 2009's Regional Dialect, American Scene Paintings from the John and Susan Horseman Collection, and its follow-up in 2012 called Modern Dialect, American Paintings from the John and Susan Horseman Collection. She also was involved in organizing 2010's Anything But Clear, the Studio Glass Movement, 1979 to 2009, the Impressionist Revolution, 40 Years of French Art at the Dixon in 2016, The Real Beauty, the Artistic World of Eugenia Ioratzis in 2018, Memphis in 2021, Memphis in 2024, All Aboard the Railroad in American Art in 2024, and Chris Antman, An Occasional Craving in 2025. Julie also manages the Dixon's Mallory Wurzburger series, which has been highlighting contemporary art in the Memphis area since 2008. In 2021, she published an updated catalog of more than 100 works of art from the Dixon's collection entitled Dixon Gallery Gardens, Painting, Sculpture, Works on Paper. Her forthcoming projects include 2026 exhibition and publication Café Society, Art and Sociability in Paris, 1855 to 1914. I think you'll agree with me, Julie certainly stays busy. Julie, I'm very excited to turn it over to you.
And does everything look okay, Lisa?
Good. Yep, you can go ahead and start the show.
Okay, great. Let's go. Thank you all for tuning in tonight. You know, it's we're all busy during the week, so I appreciate you. So many of you. It's just great to see so many numbers keep popping up on the participants. I really appreciate you taking time to listen to me talk tonight. I'm so excited. And before I get started, I want to thank Lisa first for that super duper warm welcome. And thank you, Lisa, for inviting me to speak and for your professionalism throughout this whole process of getting me ready for this lecture. I'm sure all of you who are tuning in know what a treasure you have in Lisa. And she has been so patient with me trying to test out Zoom. You know, you would think 5.5 years into giving talks on Zoom and working on Zoom, we'd have it all figured out. But no, it still confounds me sometimes. So thank you, Lisa. Oops. All right. So I am here tonight to talk to you about the organization of All Aboard the Railroad in American Art, 1840 to 1955. Here is the cover of the catalog. It's a Thomas Hart Benton on the cover. And then you can see the schedule for the show. The All Aboard project was it's just such a fun exhibition to be a part of, and just such a treat for me to work on. And I was very excited and really very proud when Lisa contacted me a while back to ask me to speak to you all. It is really gratifying to know that there are people out there in the world that know about the projects that you create. It's great to know when the word gets out. Some of you who are tuning in may be museum professionals, and you all know that press, and particularly national press, is getting harder and harder to get these days. So I was very happy to know that there were enough people who knew about the All Aboard project that that you all asked me to participate in this program tonight. So. And certainly makes sense for the Center for Railroad Photography and Art for me to talk about All Aboard. So I'm, again, I'm very excited to virtually be with you all tonight. Okay, All Aboard was truly a collaboration between three institutions that are, close friends. Shelburne Museum in Vermont, and I'm not sure if you can see my arrow, but here it is on here's Shelburne at the bottom right, the Dixon in Memphis, and that's my home away from home right there at the top right, and then on the left is the Joslyn Art Museum in Omaha. These are three museums. All three of us are in communities where the railroad has had a huge impact. Shelburne being close to Burlington, and Shelburne even has a historic train car as part of their collection. Omaha has of course, a connection with Union Pacific, and Memphis being a huge transportation hub. We have a big BNSF presence. And, if anybody's ever been to Memphis, if there's by any chance somebody tuning in tonight that lives in Memphis, you know that the train, the railroad, the train runs right through the middle of town, especially in my neighborhood of East Memphis. So it is the bane of many people's existence here. I get caught by the train all the time, but it's also the best excuse for being late. So we were very, we knew that our community, and I know that Shelburne and Joslyn too, knew that there would all of our communities would be very receptive to an exhibition about trains. But I want to be, I'm talking about the organization of the show, and I want to be, really clear with you all and honest about the organization of the show. And I don't want to take credit for a project that's not really mine. All Aboard was absolutely the brainchild of this man on your screen, our director, the director of the Dixon, Kevin Sharp. He has been wanting to organize an exhibition about the railroad and American art in particular for quite a while, really the whole time I've known him. And he and I have worked together at the Dixon since 2007. So in late 2018, we found ourselves at the Dixon in what we call reload mode. We had organized some pretty ambitious exhibitions in that year prior, and we're now in a place, we're at that point in a place where we were ready to see what's next, to tackle some more some new projects. So, we felt like it was finally the time for Kevin's All Aboard project to get done. And we started on this project the way we start on every project, which is by building checklists. These checklists, like or especially the ones in the early phases or kind of the beta phase, are really more like wish lists, things that you would have in your exhibition if, in a perfect world, if budget or loan restrictions weren't a factor. So as we started assembling this mega list, really, certain themes started to emerge that would ultimately become the sections of the show. We had to think about, this is when we really started to think about what did we want this exhibition to be. It had been a while since Wellesley College had organized the show that the catalog on your left was for, and the Railway Exhibition of 2008, organized by Liverpool and Kansas City, was focused on European art and American art, and it brought in other media besides painting into that project. Ultimately, we decided that though the notion of trains as a subject for paintings was not a uniquely American idea, and so I have a painting by J.M.W. Turner and Claude Monet here on the screen for you. So obviously it wasn't a uniquely American idea, but there was a uniquely American response to the idea of the train as a subject for a work of art. So the checklist building continued, and here's another screenshot of an early checklist for the show. And the research continued, and then the pandemic happened. So I want to be again, I want to be honest with you about my involvement in the All Aboard project. And though as the curator, chief curator, whatever you want to say, at the Dixon, I had certainly had my hands involved in the All Aboard project from the beginning. Kevin had really been leading it with the help of some other members of the Dixon curatorial staff. The early digging and checklist building for the project was started by Katie Kaiser down here at the bottom left, who was an exhibitions assistant at the Dixon at the time. And then March 2020 happened, and we all went home for what I thought was a week for this thing called coronavirus. And then it was really a lockdown. We all got sent home, and the All Aboard project went off the rails for a bit, or should I say it came to a screeching halt, really. When we returned to work, and the Dixon was only closed for about March 15th to June 1st of 2020, so a short amount of time. Our staff didn't really start going back until July, our curatorial staff until about July of 2020. But when we returned to work, we began experiencing, and maybe many of you tuning in tonight also had this happen, we began experiencing what came to be called the Great Resignation. And we saw Katie Kaiser left the Dixon. Then our curatorial assistant, Mallory Sharp, took over the admin of the project, and then she left the Dixon to finish her dissertation. Then Patty Daigle, up here in the top left, started as our assistant curator, and then she left. And then Teresa Cunningham, right here, came on as assistant curator, and then she left. So it was sort of an exhausting few years in there. But I wanted everybody to know that a lot of people go into the development of an exhibition. The curator or the author, the kind of editor of the catalog gets a lot of the credit for it, but all four of these women played a really important role in the early phases of the development of the project and the administration of the project, and that's really really crucial, that work that gets done in the beginning. So in the middle of all this, like many of you, if you're in a museum organization who might be tuning in, we had to pause on this project, and it was sort of indefinite. Museum exhibition calendars all over the world got scrambled in March in 2020. And projects that curators had worked on for years, curatorial teams had worked on for years, were delayed, or they were, worst case scenario, just canceled altogether. So there was a sort of a waiting period that happened between March of 2020 and about March or April of 2023. The All Aboard project was always sort of in our minds, in the back of our minds, but there were so many other things to do as we were trying to get the Dixon, keep our doors open, install the exhibitions that we had on our kind of skeleton and ever-changing crew, keeping everyone safe, et cetera, et cetera. So it's about at this point that I really came, into the picture. And I've told everyone that I sort of inherited this project, and I'm so grateful that I did. When Teresa Cunningham left in early 2023, we were right at the point where we were ready to, print out the loan requests and send them out. So, and we were facing manuscript deadlines for the catalog, which, yikes, that was sort of it's a high pressure moment, really. And so we just rolled up our sleeves and got to work and made lists and checked things off as we were sending out loan requests. And we focused the checklist on works of art that really spoke to the themes that emerged that would ultimately become the sections of the show. And so these are those themes: smoke in the wilderness, industry and urbanization, the lonely rail, and passengers all. And these were the sections in the installation of the exhibition and the chapters that are in the catalog. And we gave the show a title. We had been calling the show, just for fun, All Aboard, ooh, and like our director would go, hoo, hoo, every time we talk about it, just to be sort of silly. But then when it came down to it, we really liked the title, and the catalog team, which is D. Giles Limited, who does a lot of art museum publications, they really liked it too from a marketing standpoint. So we stuck with it and we moved full steam ahead on the project. So now from this point forward for a little while, I'm going to be talking about the project as a roller coaster ride. That's another kind of transportation on tracks. And it's true. We found that even as we were sending out loan requests for this project in the spring of 2023, many people, many of our colleagues at museums were still not back at work, like working at work. Loan committees at museums were meeting less frequently, and in general, a lot of art museums had become much stricter regarding loans of works of art in their collections. And we found that a thematic project such as All Aboard was easier, a little bit easier to turn down a request for than, say, like a monographic exhibition focused on one artist. And it didn't used to be this way. Kevin said throughout the project, it didn't used to be this hard to organize exhibitions. And we just found that some of this was, it was more of a challenge than we had expected. So I thought I would go through the sections of the exhibition with you, and we'll see the paintings that were included in the show, and then talk about and then I'll show you some of the ones that got away from us. Just to show you how difficult some of the negotiations were for the show, this is a screenshot of a section of the spreadsheet that we kept detailing all of the loan requests for the show. The green rows are approved loan requests, and the red strike throughs are loans that were declined. So it was a lot of requests that we had that were declined for one reason or another. And, I don't say it to call people out or anything, but just to show you that, how much uncertainty there is sometimes in the planning of an exhibition. And that's just how it goes. So, it's no hard feelings thing. It's just how an exhibition gets put together. I also wanted to say that after the loan requests were sent out, this woman on the left joined the Dixon team. Ellen Doherty came on in the summer of 2023 as our assistant curator. She immediately provided backup and research support that was needed to bring our project to completion. She also jumped right in, and I would say probably, I don't know, her second day at the Dixon, we asked her hey, can you put together a chronology of the American Railroad? And she did it, and she did an amazing job with it. And that chronology is featured in the catalog and was featured in the exhibition, in the installation of our exhibition at the Dixon. So the section that we had loosely called Machine in the Garden after Leo Marx's book became Smoke in the Wilderness. And this section starts with the earlier work rooted in the Hudson River School. This to me is what first comes to mind when you think of the railroad in American art. This is the railroad interrupting the otherwise virginal American landscape. The marvel of engineering that was awesome to many and a harbinger of a new way of life, for better or for worse. So when we originally crafted the checklist for the exhibition, we had several paintings from the Museum of Fine Arts Boston's collection, as you might imagine. So we really had to focus our planning on to which one work of art we felt was most crucial to the project. So between this Thomas Cole and the Asher B. Durand, both masterful works of art, amazing works of art, we felt like the Cole was the one to focus on. And luckily, our generous colleagues at the MFA agreed to lend the Thomas Cole. And just commend the team and express gratitude to the team at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston. They're always just great colleagues and have such an amazing collection, are very generous with lending it. The Cropsey here was one of those that sadly got away from us. We were truly dying to have this in the exhibition. It's just beautiful and really speaks to our theme so perfectly. And we had really wanted to make it the cover of the catalog, but ultimately the loan didn't work out. And I think we found out that it was going to be part of another project, so it couldn't have been loaned to us. And that's such a blow when that happens, but it's just how it goes sometimes, and all you can do is just keep chugging along and you sort of have to sometimes reorganize your thoughts, reorganize your essay for your catalog sometimes. And something that might have had originally a really long discussion becomes just a comparative illustration in an essay, and that's totally fine. This was a loan, a major loan that did come through for us, like the MFA's Thomas Cole, and this one, Westward, the Star of Empire, from the St. Louis Mercantile Library. And this painting is one of the treasures of that museum's collection. And they're an institution that the Dixon has worked with in one way or another a few times over the years, and they've just been great colleagues to us. Westward, the Star of Empire was absolutely well known in its day. It traveled around the country. It traveled across Europe after its completion. And it illustrated and really dramatized for many and for our exhibition the conflict between Euro-American expansion and Indigenous or Native Americans' fight to protect their way of life. It's a huge painting and it's really impressive. And it was for us in a lot of ways sort of the crux of that first section, the Smoke in the Wilderness section of the show. Another beautiful painting of Native Americans observing, in this case, they're observing the train, not trying to derail it, is this Henry Farney from the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum. And it's a great painting and a really, really great loan for us to have gotten. And then a few later paintings that, go beyond the Hudson River School time period, go further into the 20th century. They continue to illustrate the concept of smoke in the wilderness. The Thomas Hart Benton was such a great loan from the Denver Art Museum. Obviously, we loved it and made it the cover of our catalog. And the Grandma Moses on the right shows with a lot of charm how the train, this is 1944, the train had become, by this point, a sign of nostalgia. That was something that was once, like a marvel of engineering. Yeah. Oops. So this section, this was industry and urbanization. This was the section that I inherited, and I dug in right away to be able to write the essay on this section in the catalog. So I'm going to talk about this section in the most detail. This was good fortune for me since I'm most comfortable in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And this section has a lot to do with, if you think about the railroad and American art during the Progressive era, section has a lot to do with workers' rights, and a lot of changes that occurred during the Progressive era. But the timing was pretty good since one of the buzziest shows on TV was and still is The Gilded Age. If any of you are fan or watchers of that show on HBO. It was an easy connection to make for our visitors during tours and talks about the All Aboard exhibition. And if you watch the HBO show, you know that the Russell family, so this is the new money Russell family here. Their wealth comes from the railroad. And George Russell starts to run into trouble when the men building his railroad and expanding his railroad start to revolt. The main railroad tycoon that gets discussed in the All Aboard catalog is this man, Alexander Cassatt. Not really so much because he's Mary Cassatt's brother, but more because he's the driving force behind the construction of Pennsylvania Penn Station in New York. Named for the Pennsylvania Railroad, which he was the president of. But more on that in a minute. And while it would have been easy to get swept up in the glint and the glimmer of the Gilded Age, the nature of the work in this section was more about the grittier side of life on the railroads. And we ended up framing, because of the loans that we got for the exhibition, we framed this section of the catalog and the installation as a tale of two cities, of Pittsburgh and New York, and the artistic response to the industrialization of those cities. So we started on Pittsburgh with the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, and obviously, I'm sure all of you as train enthusiasts know it was a major event in the history of the United States, the first major workers' rebellion and an anti-monopoly uprising that had a huge impact beyond rail workers. And we experienced it in the exhibition through this painting by William Robinson Lee. It was loaned by the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh. Again, I just like to point out how great the Carnegie was to us for this project. But this painting depicts an event from 1877, and it almost looks like eyewitness illustration, but it was made in 1895. It was made 20 years after the fact. It was William Robinson Lee's image was an illustration for Scribner's Magazine's July to December 1895 issue in an article entitled A History of the Last Quarter Century in the United States. So that event was so important that it was, sort of commemorated almost 20 years later. In addition to workers' rebellions, we also wanted to illustrate through art the environmental impacts that the railroad and its industries had on the American landscape. So by the time Colin Campbell Cooper, who was a Pennsylvania native, but living in New York at the time, returned to his home state to paint Pittsburgh in 1905, the effect of more than 100 years of mining and factories and railroads had taken a toll on the landscape. And Pittsburgh was already known by this point as the city of smoke. So when we get to the 1920s and Otto Kuhler's painting of Pittsburgh, we maybe understand where this is coming from. And you start to see some of the beauty in the scene, I think. I think there's a little influence here of what some of the Impressionists were doing and incorporating industry into landscape painting. And Otto Kuhler's painting of Steel Valley is smoky and it's grimy, but I think it's also a little beautiful too. Kuhler, I'm sure a lot of you know, was a German immigrant with a background in industrial and railroad design. So his painting of Pittsburgh is less apocalyptic than the Colin Campbell Cooper. And Kuhler would eventually be hired by Alco, I think, to create ads for the company and design passenger trains. So back to our tale of two cities, going on to New York. We had, can't have a show about the railroad and not include New York. Depicting the railroad's impact on the New York area was key to the project. First with metropolitan area rail systems, and starting with elevated trains that had appeared in New York as early as the 1870s as a solution to traffic. The quintessential ashcan artist John Sloan here depicted the L in many of his paintings, his views of average life in New York. This was a painting that we had desperately wanted for the exhibition from the Memorial Art Gallery in Rochester. And it also was going to be in another exhibition at another museum. So there was a lone conflict with that painting. But we were able to get this amazing painting, 6 O'Clock Winter, which the Phillips Collection generously loaned to us into the exhibition, to all three venues. In election night, this previous painting, the L doesn't seem so menacing, but in 6 O'Clock Winter, it's got this kind of powerful machine energy to it. It's very heavy above the heads of the unassuming workaday Manhattanites below. And 10 years later, John Sloan would depict the L again from his studio in Greenwich Village. And this painting was also generously loaned to us by our good friends at the National Gallery of Art in Washington. And great, New York was becoming a hugely important city. But to get to New York by train, and you may remember this if you've seen the Gilded Age show, Pennsylvania railroad travelers had to access the city by ferry after arriving in New Jersey, in Jersey City. So as president of the Pennsylvania Railroad, Alexander Cassatt initiated the building of Penn Station that would connect the city from the surrounding area via tunnels. So as you can imagine, the construction of Penn Station was, it was talked about daily in the New York press, but it also became kind of an irresistible subject for artists who were in tune to contemporary life. So, and a lot of those artists are who we associate with the Ashcan School today, and they were fascinated by the enormity of the project. So this painting by Ernest Lawson, Excavation Penn Station, from the Weizmann Art Museum in Minneapolis, generously loaned this really, really special painting to the show. And it shows how all of these workers are working with machine. It's sort of man and machine working together to build this enormous project. And really in the middle of it, there's this little train kind of chugging along in the foreground that reminds you of why this work is being done. And I always thought that the figures in this painting sort of look like ants in an ant colony. It's very busy. So a lot of works that depict the construction of Penn Station are really iconic, and those are particularly by George Bellows. And we wanted to really reinsert this painting into that conversation. Here's one New York painting by Bellows that got away from us. Bellows includes the railroad in a lot of his New York paintings, and this one of Riverside Park was one of them. This was one that we really, really wanted and tried to make it work. But unfortunately, I think this was another one where there was a project that may have been delayed because of COVID, and ultimately it wasn't available for all aboard. So you win some, you lose some, but we were able to get this painting from the Flint Institute of Arts in Michigan, Leon Kroll's Terminal Yards, and it became really a signature image of the exhibition. This is Kroll's painting of Weehawken, and really showing industry, American industry, this very kind of busy scene of American industry, but it's still very beautiful and painted with a great, artistic sensitivity to it. It's buzzing, but not so gritty in the way that Ernest Lawson's painting was, or any of George Bellows' were. Kroll showed the painting, this one that was in All Aboard, at the landmark 1913 Armory Show in New York. And it was at that show praised by then former President Theodore Roosevelt as one of the most striking works in the show. And he complimented Kroll's sharp eye and his talented hand. We were also able to include this John Marin's view of Weehawken's grain elevator in the exhibition, so a more modernist take on the same subject. And one of those things that happened in the planning of the show, Brown Brothers Harriman, the investment banking firm, found out that we were organizing this exhibition and offered to lend this painting by Sheldon Penoyer, Union Pacific. Penoyer, who some of you may know, was one of those painters you might call a trained specialist. Otto Kuhler was another one, and had even written a book called Locomotives in Our Lives. And thanks to the internet, we were able to get a couple of copies for the Dixon for our guests to look through. We always have a section in our exhibitions that I just call for further reading, where we have books that sort of pertain to whatever exhibition we have up. So we had a couple of copies of this for people to look through. Okay, the Lonely Rail is this was Kevin Sharp's section of the exhibition. His essay for the catalog described the shift in the perception of the railroad in the early 20th century. What had once been seen as this great vehicle for connection and opportunity became, at a certain point, an agent of loneliness and separation and migration. So hence the Lonely Rail. We had a good bit of dystopian type landscapes in the show, these sort of sometimes surreal images with a surreal quality to them that reveal a certain loneliness. Here's Aaron Borod's slag heaps from the Sheldon Museum, showing sort of a lone worker. And here's Edward Hopper's Approaching a City. This was one of those paintings, the Phillips collection had loaned a John Sloan in a previous section, and we had really, really wanted this this painting in the exhibition, and we went back and forth with them. It wasn't going to be available, but ultimately they had to have a new director, and he very generously loaned it. It only ended up being able to go to the Shelburne Museum, but just to have Edward Hopper as part of a project, those loans are always very difficult to get. We were thrilled and just very grateful to our colleagues at the Phillips. Here's two paintings that actually didn't end up being able to be part of the show, the Charles Sheeler Classic Landscape, and these were both sort of speaking to the idea of the Lonely Rail, and the Edward Hopper on the right. The final section of the show was Passengers All, or as we had originally called it when we were putting the checklist together, People of the Rail. Who was riding the trains? How were they built? How were they run? Who were the people that are connected, and how are they depicted in American art? So the Edmund Tarbell from the Crocker was such a great loan to get for the show. And our friends down the street here in Memphis at the Memphis Brooks Museum of Art loaned their Thomas Hart Benton to the project. Tom Denenberg, who is the director of the Shelburne Museum, wrote what I really think is truly just a wonderful essay for the catalog that is framed around Sister Carrie, a discussion of Sister Carrie and the role that trains play in that novel in getting Carrie from her small town to the big city. And we have Samuel J. Wolfe's painting The Underworld that shows, this is from the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts collection, and shows the sort of the cross section of American life that can be observed from a ride on a train or a ride on a subway. So you have everybody from sort of a well-dressed couple here to, maybe a police officer or a porter, a family with, young babies, a guy reading the newspaper. And the Virginia Museum in Richmond, the VMFA, are just some of the best colleagues out there in the biz and are always so good to the Dixon and very generous with their very special collection. These two paintings show, again, sort of like the Samuel J. Wolfe, how the classes are mingling on public transportation in urban areas. So here's the Walter Pock, the subways, and this is in New York, and then Alan Rohan Crite, the car stop in Boston, showing people coming, going, climbing aboard and getting off of different types of transportation. In the Crite, for sure, there's all different types of transportation represented in that image. And then in the subway, you have, soldiers and suffragettes all mingling on one ride on a train. There are a lot of images in the show of people working on the railroads, such as this one by Otto Kuhler, and the one on the right by Reginald Marsh. For the Marsh and the installation of our show, we had a great little video that we screened about how the railway mail service worked and how, that's just something that's not part of our life anymore. So I think for school-age children especially, and really for anybody, it was just amazing to see how that system, the logistics of that and how mail got distributed all over the country through moving trains that didn't even come to a stop. Here's some more images of rail workers that were in the show, both real and legendary. We had this great Joe Jones on the left, all the live long day. I had to keep myself from singing it all the time. And the Palmer Hayden, his hammer in his hand, a great loan from the Museum of African American Art in Los Angeles. And my memory was that they had just received, as we were making the request, funding to conserve this painting. So when it came to us, it just looked fantastic. It's in great condition, and just a wonderful museum to partner with, and a great work of art to have had in the exhibition. This Thomas Hart Benton, the wreck of the old 97, I'm sure some of you all are familiar with it. This was from the Hunter Museum of American Art in Chattanooga. And, they had some other projects where this painting was a part of. But they were able to loan it to, I think it was loaned to the Joslyn only. So one of our partners was able to have the painting in the show, and that was really great. Another painting that we wanted so badly for the Passengers All section was this painting by Norman Rockwell. It's in a private collection, and we tried for more than a year to get in touch with the owner of the painting through our colleagues at various museums. And there were moments of hope, but ultimately, we weren't able to include the painting in the show, but just it was still included in the catalog and it as a comp fig in Tom Denenberg's essay. But then we ended up getting this little Carol Clore, who's a Southern artist from Arkansas, really associated with Memphis, though and a train of depicting a memory of his of traveling to Mexico in the years immediately after World War II. And this was a really kind of great late addition to the exhibition, and I absolutely loved having it in the show. This painting was a big loan from the Whitney Museum in New York, and we were very grateful to have had it. And it made it, it was sort of an ending point for the exhibition. And it revealed how far really, truly the narrative had gone from the exhibition, from Thomas Cole at the beginning to George Tooker at the end, and how the railroad, the perception of the railroad in American life had gone from this, almost sublime, this machine of wonder, to this sort of more noir treatment of the railroad as a subject for art. A really striking way to end the exhibition. Okay, so the loans had been secured and the catalog was sent to print, and all that was left to do was bring the project to life. And it can feel weird to say that, but this is sort of the installation of the show is sort of the easy part. It's definitely the fun part. And it's really rewarding to see your show come to life. So our friends at the Shelburne in Vermont were the first to open the exhibition in the summer of 2024. And they chose to lean into the railroad theme with this title wall painted in a great railroad red. And here's Tom Denenberg standing, the director of Shelburne, standing on a stool, hopped up on a bench to thank his supporters at the opening of the exhibition. And to the right, you can see Jack Becker, director of the Joslyn in Omaha. And to the left, I think this is our friend Eric Baumgardner, who is also snapping the picture. And I know Eric has taken some beautiful photographs of trains over the years, and I was so glad to know that he's a supporter for the Center for Railroad Photography and Art. And hi, Eric, if you're tuning in. Hi, Eric and Catherine. And here's another photo of the installation at Shelburne. And once the exhibitions open, the education and the events teams really get to shine and be creative as well. And there were some really great programs, as you all can imagine, at all three institutions. So here's a curator-led tour at Shelburne. And you know what? How fun is it to have the band Train come play as part of Shelburne's summer concert series? I thought that was great. So fun. At the Dixon, we painted our title wall Frisco red, the color of the engine of the St. Louis, I hope I'm getting this right, San Francisco train line. And this show was open during the fall quarter, which is historically a very busy time at the Dixon, and we had great attendance for this show. And of course, and great attendance at all of our programming, which is exactly, of course, what we wanted. We installed a timeline in the exhibition detailing important moments in the history of the railroad in the United States and in the history of American art. So this was something we took from the catalog and brought it to life in the installation of the exhibition. One thing that the Dixon did was incorporate song lyrics into each section that connected with the railroad. Kevin Sharp had included lyrics by Jimmie Rodgers, largely considered the father of country music, into his essay, The Lonely Rail. So he and our preparator, Jeff Goggins, who is a very talented musician himself, started talking about ways to include music about the railroad into our installation. And Jeff came up with a list of songs pertaining to the railroad and specific lyrics that matched up each section of the exhibition. So we printed them in vinyl and included them installed them above the paintings in each of the sections. So here's a few of those for you all to just see what we did. And we also screened Buster Keaton's The General in December to a packed house at the Dixons. Steve Ross is a film historian and filmmaker who lives in Memphis and a retired longtime professor of film at the University of Memphis and has been closely connected with the Dixon the whole time I've worked there for decades. He gave a great introduction to the film, and it was just a fun tie-in for the exhibition. So see what I mean? That the installation and the run of the show really is the fun part. When we get to the show, made its final opening at the Joslyn, and it was just such a wonderful. They did a great job with the exhibition, and they were on kind of riding this high themselves, having just opened their new Snowhetta building and had a lot of energy and momentum for the exhibition. So it definitely did not lose steam at the end of the show. Kevin Sharp, at the end of the tour, I should say. Kevin Sharp spoke at their opening reception, and the Joslyn really always has great programming tied to their exhibitions, including bringing the director of the Japanese American National Museum to talk about Henry Sugimoto, the artist of When Can We Go Home? This painting that they loaned to the exhibition and was conserved ahead of the exhibition itself. And the Joslyn implemented great workshops for children and adults throughout their run of the show, their venue, including this watercolor workshop inspired by the amazing Georgia O'Keeffe in the exhibition that was loaned by the Amarillo Museum of Art. So you can see that even though the show had its sort of challenges, its ups and downs, it was just a very positive experience overall. We learned a lot. I know I certainly did. And we brought together great works of art. We told great stories, and we established or strengthened friendships with museums and private collectors who did loan to the project. The next, people say, what's next? The next step, I would say, would be to take one of these artists who was in this show, maybe one of those trained painters like Otto Kuhler or Sheldon Penoyer, and do a whole exhibition on that artist, a retrospective exhibition on them. So maybe that's the next project, a spin-off to come from this. But that's it. That's all. I just want to thank you for taking a stroll down memory lane with me. And again, the show was just great to work on. All three of us learned that there are a strong community of trained enthusiasts in all of our cities. And many of them came to see the show, hear the lectures, attend the programs, told all of their friends. And it was just a really great experience. So I hope you all will, tune in to the Dixon, get to know who we are, and look at the projects and exhibitions we have in the pipeline. So Lisa, that's the end of my talk. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I thank y'all for bearing with me.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I'm excited to share some of these comments with you that we've been having come through, but so many are absolutely just in awe of what they just saw and all of the hard work that went into this. Yes. Elrond, what did you think? I think I feel like I'm a little bit speechless. It was so good.
Well, I always tend to have a running monologue. I can't keep an inner monologue when I'm watching these programs, but this one in particular, there were some serious gasps that I had. I mean, I remember Westward, the Star of Empire, I love so much, but Morning of a New Day was the first huge gasp from me. It was breathtaking.
It's a beautiful painting in person too. Really, really is. Sort of makes you gasp. It's stunning. It's a stunning painting.
Is it large? I mean, I'm just curious of the sizes.
No, it's not huge. Westward, the Star of Empire is a big painting. Okay. Morning of a New Day, my memory is it's sort of what I would call easel size. Just, normal size painting, not tiny by any means, but not one of those big, salon type big paintings. that sometimes Hudson River School paintings can be.
Oh, well, it was just fantastic. We have so many questions, so I want
Yeah,
to get
yeah.
out of the way.
We'll jump in here. Eric asked, where is the exhibition now, or is it going to be coming up again in the future, or is it done? Can you give any info on that?
Yeah, the exhibition is concluded. So the loans have all been returned after the show closed at the Joslyn. All of the loans got returned to their owners. Now, there's no immediate plans to travel that show again, but that has happened before where a show has sort of been resurrected and loans have been renegotiated. And it was a Dixon show. It was Kevin Sharp's Bold, Cautious, True exhibition about Walt Whitman and American art of the Civil War era. Was shown at the Dixon and Katona in New York. And then it got resurrected, like 2 years later or something by the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. So that does happen sometimes.
Okay, great. Our executive director, Scott Lodes, wanted to just sing your praises. He loved the presentation, but wanted to say that he was very impressed with the wonderful paintings that he'd never seen from such a wide variety of presentation or institutions. And he said he'd like to know about how you went about locating these paintings and finding out about them.
Well, the internet is a great resource for finding things, but there's no substitute for books. And we have a great library at the Dixon, and you just have to be a good researcher and know how to look for images in books and where to find them. You start with books that have been done about the railroad. In art, and you sort of go from there, and then you start finding who some of these artists are, and that's where it's really important to collaborate with other institutions. So when we were first having talks with Shelburne and the Joslyn, this was before Zoom, so these were conference calls that we would and they would
Old
say,
school.
yeah, I know. And they would say, oh, have you thought about X painting? Have you thought about adding, we've got this Grandma Moses with the train in it, or we've got this, we know this collector that's got this. So you just start keeping your ears open and your eyes open to it. And that's where you just start this checklist on a Word document and you just keep adding to it. As you find things, you sort of dump it all in there. And eventually you reorder things and they become a show.
Yeah, that's amazing. Our friend Carl said, as a curator, what are some of your favorite catalog writing tips? He said that he loved the catalog and the show, lots of ideas as he's documenting his collection.
Catalog writing tips for me, I think a timeline is very helpful to build if you're telling a, kind of a chronological story that's got events from history in it. You start with, 1850 and put your bullet points of what happened then. 1851, put your bullet points in. I sort of like to organize my research that way as much as I can, so that when you do sort of sit down and go, I'm ready to write, you have something to reference that is sort of your guide, your outline for your project along the way. And really, you let the images tell the story. Once you know what images are, what works of art are approved for your for your exhibition, you got to talk about all of them. So they also become your sort of your stopping points along the way in telling your whatever story you're going to tell in your essay.
Oh, great point. Bob said, can you say anything about budgeting an exhibition? And he said, great presentation. Thank you so much.
Well, I can say a little bit about budgeting because we're in budget mode at the Dixon right now for 2026. And another thing is exhibitions aren't getting any easier. They're also not getting any cheaper. But we our registrars work really closely together, and registrars are so important in I didn't really talk about ours, but such a key role in the organization of exhibitions. And they really work with each other. Like the registrar at the Dixon will really work with the registrar at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston on making the shipment manageable. We try to consolidate shipments for exhibitions as much as we can. So like everything coming from New England, if the museums agree to it, we'll all ride the same truck to Shelburne. So we do our best to make the budget as manageable as possible. Imagine a halo. This is when I go to our controller, I say, imagine a halo on top of my head. So, and you know, but everything else, it just costs what it costs. The book costs what it costs. We do our best to minimize those expenses. But you know, these exhibitions are important, and having the catalogs to go along with them is crucial. The exhibitions come and go, but those books are forever, and that's a super duper important part of the project for us. So, you know, budgeting it's crucial, and we try to do our best to stick to the budget. And I think we went under budget for this project.
Wow.
But you know, not by much. But every little bit helps.
Yeah.
But you know, you still have to do, the important thing is that the work gets done and the show looks as good as it possibly can.
Yeah, amazing. Another question from Carl. For private collectors open to lending work, how would we get on the radar for curators? He said it sounds like most exhibits aren't public knowledge until after you finalize the lineup.
Yeah, music to my ears. We love to know private collectors, and a lot of times galleries are helpful in connecting museums with private collectors. Auction houses are very helpful for that. And museum colleagues, you know, a lot of people know the collectors in their own communities. So for instance, in Shelburne, there might have been a collector that owned a, you know, certain painting, and they would say, hey, there's this guy in town that's got this beautiful Thomas Cole, you know, I'm just making this up. So it's a sometimes word of mouth, but I encourage collectors out there to get to know the curators and directors of art museums in your community, or just museums that really you have a connection with, that museums that you love. Just reach out to them. We love to get invited to people's houses to see their collections, and then you know, we keep notes on what people have in their collection, and knowing if somebody's open to lending to a show is just the best thing to hear. So that's just my advice there.
Well, those are great tips. I think that there's no substitute for really diving into your, you know, your community within where you live, and that's a really powerful tool, because who knows who they have contacts with, just like you with the Joslyn and the Shelburne. Like they're not necessarily right within the Memphis area, but they are your partners, and a museum really do share information that way. So great tip.
Oh, we do. And you never know, when you go to somebody's house and you see a painting on their wall, or sculpture or photograph, whatever, it might spark something in your mind, in a curator's mind. It's like, hey, we've got a couple of paintings that are similar to that. And then I'm like, well, there's an exhibition. If you've got 3 paintings, you know, that's the start of an exhibition. So, you know, never be timid about getting in touch with a curator or director or museum professional in any, you know, capacity. If you're, you know, want to share your collection with museum audiences.
Yeah. We got another question from our a friend, Scott Lotus. He said, I felt like the latter 2 sections, The Lonely Rail and Passengers All, were where this project made its most unique contributions to the dialogue of the railroad in American art. And I'd love to know how you landed on those 2 themes and developed them.
Well, it was sort of, I think that's a really good point. And I think that came from checklist building. That was, you know, we're not just going to do a landscape show. It's not just going to be Smoke in the Wilderness or Machine in the Garden, whatever you want to call it. And because that show, those themes and the industry, and like industrial sublime, that had sort of been discussed before. But the idea of talking about isolation and loneliness was something, and that was a great connection for us giving tours of the shows, because we talk a lot today about how cell phones are supposed to make us more connected to each other, but end up making us isolated. It was an easy connection for us to make in tours. And then we also talked about like that Georgia O'Keeffe watercolor. The idea of her riding a train from New York to the Southwest, that's not like getting on a plane and going, on a 2-hour flight somewhere. That's a really long journey, and you don't have your Kindle to keep you occupied. It can be, travel can be sort of lonely. So there were easy conversations to have in both of those exhibitions, both of those sections, but they really came from our call from Kevin and the directors to include anything pertaining to the railroad, not just images of the train in the landscape, but who were the people working on the railroad? Who were the people riding trains? So we kind of started with Edward Hopper, thinking about some of his train paintings of people riding trains, and then it kind of grew from there.
Yeah.
And that Palmer Hayden we had wanted from the very beginning of John Henry, his hammer in his hand. So there were some paintings that we knew were sort of in our brains from the very beginning. And great to have been able to get that.
Fantastic. Trent asked, did you consider other artifacts to include with the exhibition? I think you had said that there were some books, but were there any other items that were included?
Kevin really made a decision. There were a lot of photographs historic photographs that could have been in the show. There were, like at one point we talked about like a dinner service from a historic train car. And we ultimately decided that it would be a paintings show. Part of that is the reality, very practical, that the pandemic happened and a lot of the exhibition got sort of complicated, and we felt in some ways, even though we had been working on this project since 2018, that we were behind in a lot of ways because the pandemic sort of put a screeching halt to a lot of our work. So we ended up really just making it a painting show rather than paintings and decorative arts and photography and sculpture.
Okay. Eric Baumgardner said, thank you for the 15 minutes of fame. It was an absolutely wonderful presentation.
Yeah.
That was great.
Ryan asked, the show was delayed by COVID and seemed to drag about 5 years from during the planning of the show. What is a normal gestation period for a show or exhibition?
From without a pandemic in the middle, I would say a normal gestation period can be anywhere from, sometimes they're fast tracked and it's 2 or 3 years. Sometimes we've had exhibitions that took 4 or 5 years from initial conception to execution, in opening day in the galleries. It depends on your museum's exhibition calendar. A lot of times you get a partner for the project and they say, great, we want to do this, but we can't do it until 2027 or something like that. And then sometimes you start having initial conversations with lenders and they might say, we're happy to loan, but the painting won't be available until X date. So sometimes even you wait for a project for a really crucial loan to be available. But throw in a pandemic and it's a lot longer.
All bets are off.
I'll be really glad when a discussion of an exhibition doesn't involve the COVID pandemic. It hadn't happened yet. All of our exhibitions are still like, well, because of the pandemic, we had to do this and this got delayed. but one day.
Yes.
One
Yeah,
day.
a phrase you can live without now.
Yes, no kidding.
Well, Julie, again, thank you. This was just a spectacular presentation. I think so many of us were just, yeah, speechless. It was great. Thank you for your time and effort. We really, really appreciate it, and remarkable work on this exhibition. I think a lot of people that I've known that were able to see it just were so amazed by it as well. So
Oh,
thank you. And of course,
thank you.
I have to say thank you for choosing a piece by Georgia O'Keeffe, because, you know, she is my favorite artist.
Ah!
Always have to thank you for choosing that. But
Oh,
thank you,
good.
Julie, this was wonderful. We really appreciate you.
Thank you, guys. Y'all come visit in Memphis anytime. Just look me up when you do.
Will do. Thank you, Julie. And a quick plug that our next presentation will be on December 9th, and it's going to be entitled Railroad Photography the Old Way by Jim Ehrenberger, and it is going to be amazing. We're very much looking forward to it. So thank you for everyone who joined us tonight, and we'll see you on the next one. And thank you, Julie. Good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.